Hi everyone, it's Sophia and welcome to my podcast and technically the first official episode on my podcast since the other two that dropped today are more like introductory episodes. So welcome. I definitely feel like the pressure is on for my first episode. I have to make sure I'm giving you guys an episode that you're going to love so that you want to stick around. But if not, trust me, I'm going to be talking about so many different topics. I'm sure you'll find something you love in at least one episode on my podcast as we move forward. So I actually recorded this episode already, but I was just editing the episode. And when I initially recorded the episode, it was back at the beginning of August. And it's a really great episode, I'm not gonna lie. But I just wanted to make it a little bit more current. I also feel like there are certain things that I just didn't touch on that I wanted to touch on in this kind of episode. So I've decided I'm gonna redo it, and hopefully I like this version a lot more so that I can share it with you guys, because I think it's a great way to start off the podcast, just because this is kind of like a journal of a 20-something-year-old living her life and sharing the stories and experiences and lessons she's learned. I know I've said that so many times, but I'm going to ingrain that because that really is what my podcast is about. Obviously, with time, it may change, but this is what it is right now. So today I wanted to talk about how the early 20s are such a bipolar period of time. And I know that this probably extends to the mid and late 20s as well. Given that I have no experience in those age groups, I can't really generalize, so I'm just going to stick with what I know, and that is the early 20s. As you guys probably know, I am 21 years old, still kind of on the younger age of the early 20s, but I feel like I've gotten some experience. I've gotten some idea as to what my life is going to look like during this period of time. I've already experienced some of it, and so I thought I would talk about it because I feel like ultimately a lot of my listeners will be in a very similar age group, and even if you guys are like in the later 20s, you probably can relate to this. Same with actually people who are younger than me, but I feel like this is really something that I've noticed with the early 20s. So when I initially came up with this episode, I was sort of thinking back on this trip that I took recently. I went to Boston for the first time in my life back in August, and I was visiting one of my friends, a really good friend of mine, and I was having the absolute best time of my life. I was living the dream, and I remember just I was getting very like nostalgic almost. I felt very grateful on this trip. Like I was really thinking a lot on this trip. And one of the things I was thinking about is how amazing my life is. But then when I was really thinking about it further, I was thinking about how crazy it is that the early 20s is such a bipolar time in your life. And what I mean by that is sometimes life is like absolutely slaying. You know how people sometimes say like the 20s are your peak, like it doesn't get better than that. You're young, you're attractive, like you seem to have like everything going for you. The future is ahead of you. There's so many opportunities, etc., etc. So you have that. Then you also have those moments in your life where you're like, I feel like my whole life is crumbling down and I have no clue what to do with it. Like I am actually so screwed. Like what is going on? And it's so funny how we can have these extremes happen within even a short period of time. This can happen within months. I've actually experienced this recently where I've gone kind of from the extremes and kind of back and forth too. And just the fact that we experience these extremes so often, at least I do. I hope other people do as well. But I feel like I'm not alone in this when I say that my experience with the 20s so far has been such a bipolar experience, and I honestly love it. I really do love it. I know that some people may be like, I wish I had some stability, and sure, do I crave stability sometimes? Totally. Sometimes I think about what life is going to be like when I'm finally married and I have a home and I have a family of my own, and like things just kind of have fallen into place. But the truth is, I feel like this kind of bipolarness is not just for the early 20s or the 20s in general. This is something that you experience throughout your life. So even though one day I may be quote unquote settled down with a husband and kids, that doesn't mean that my life is not going to be bipolar then either. It's just that I feel like when you're in your early 20s, everything feels so much more extreme and there is kind of a lack of stability. When I think about my life a year ago and then I think about the future like a year ahead, I just know that I'll be living such a different life in a year from now than I am currently. And when I look back to the past, I can think about what my life looked like a year ago, and it's literally so different from what my life looks like now. I mean, for example, like a year ago, I was in a happy relationship. I had just gone long distance. Like, I thought like I was so in love and all that. And right now, like currently, a year later, I am not even in contact with this person anymore. I'm figuring out how to do life on my own all over again. Just recently went no contact too. And it's like, I could not, if I were to talk to myself a year ago, like she would not imagine being in this position. Okay. Because she was dead set on the fact that she was going to end up with this man, or at least be with him for a very long time. So that says a lot. And then when I look to the future, it's like, when I really think about a year from now, I'll have graduated from college. I'll probably have a job. What job will I have? I have no clue. I probably will live in a different city. What city? Also no clue. Like, there's so many unknowns, and as much as I can try and plan ahead or kind of create these dreams, this romanticized sort of this life that I want for myself in the future, there's no guarantee that I'm going to live it. And that is so crazy, but it's also so exciting. I really do love the idea that there's so much unknown, and there's also so much good that can come out of it. I know that unknown can be scary, and yeah, it is. Like, you know, when I think about kind of my life ahead, I think about the next year, because I feel like the next year is so big for me. I'm going into my senior year of college, and there's so much to figure out in this time. First off, I have the pressure of making sure I make my last year the best one, so that I really like leave the college experience feeling as if I am fulfilled and that I really did have the experience I wanted to have. And I also have the pressure of planning ahead and figuring out what my life is going to look like after graduation. I know that eventually I'll have the job search going on, and I'll have to figure out, you know, where I can get a job, like what is the best job for me? What do I want to do with myself? I know I don't have to like pick for the rest of my life, but at least for the beginning of my career, which I feel like is such an important period of time as well. And so, yeah, there's just a lot that comes with it, and it's scary, but it's also exciting because you never know where you're going to end up. Another thing I can think of is the fact that like a year ago, I had just started school at the University of Miami. If you guys listen to my Who I Am episode, you know exactly what went down there. But it's like when I started school there, I had no plans to ever return back to UCLA. Now I am like 3 weeks away from starting my senior year at UCLA and working towards completing my degree there. And it's like, again, something I could have not planned. It's just, it was the unknown. Like I had no clue that this was going to happen. And the fact that it happened too is like so crazy. And that's what reminds me that in the future, there will be things that will happen that I just cannot plan, cannot anticipate right now. And yeah, there's just something so exciting about it. The truth is like, there are moments in my life where I feel like I'm on top of the world. For example, when I was in Boston, I was sitting, my friend had this gorgeous apartment in Seaport. 2 days that I was there, she would go to work really early. So when I would wake up, I was by myself. I would leave the apartment. I would go to a cafe, get myself a matcha latte, get myself some pastries, walk to the water, sit by the water, and just enjoy my matcha latte and my pastries. I was watching the boats go by, and I was like, oh my gosh, this is a life. I have truly made it. Everything I've ever hoped and dreamed for, like experiencing right now. Same with last summer, I was in New York City, and I was just really reflective on the fact that when I was like 12 years old, when I would go to sleep, I don't know if other people do this, but I still do this to this day. Before I go to sleep, I have this little like fantasy that plays out in my head. It's usually about me. It's like a romantic fantasy. That's what it's always been. And when I was like 12 years old, my romantic fantasy was sort of what my life ahead would look like. I think I was aiming for like mid 20s, but I was experiencing it even earlier. And it was basically me living in New York City, having a boyfriend, having a really cool job. And I was like legitimately living that. And I was like, I felt like I was on top of the world. I mean, I loved being in New York. I loved my life. Then there's like moments where it feels like your life is crashing down on you and it's really an extreme. For example, like I said, I've been doing no contact recently, and that's definitely been very difficult. I feel like I've been able to regulate the extremes a lot better in recent months. I feel like even though this is a really, really tough thing to go through, I'm not dying. okay? Sometimes, like when things are really bad, it feels like you're almost like dying. Like it's so extreme that you're like, oh my God, what is happening to me? I don't feel that way. And I'm glad that I don't feel that way. But I'm not gonna lie, like it's been really tough. Another thing is back in June, so just a couple months ago, I was literally at my worst, okay? I was at my worst. Everything seemed to be going wrong in my life. And I was like, there's no way out. Like I'm stuck here. I have hit the lowest of lows and I'm not coming back out. But in that moment, I reminded myself that you can't have highs without having lows, and you can't have lows without having highs. And I think this is important to remember, especially when you're kind of going through that low, that this is not forever. It's temporary. Like I said, we experience these extremes. Both extremes are temporary. You have the good, it's temporary. You have the bad, it's temporary. I had a dance teacher once who said nothing lasts forever, and that's something I really hold on to because that's so true. And he meant like a dance pose, but that can be applied to any aspect of life. But yeah, when I was having that moment, I was like, I am literally struggling. I don't know. I actually like there were some really scary things that were happening, and I thought, oh my God, my life is going to be completely altered if these things come true. The things that I believe are true actually happen. And it was so hard to live with that. I can't exactly share what that kind of stuff is, but let's just say it was really bad. Like I think anyone who was in that position would really feel like they're at their lowest or very close to their lowest. And then like fast forward like 2 months later, August, I was just living the life. Like I was having a really good time. I was feeling so much better. The things that I was worrying about back then no longer worried me anymore. Things were like looking up. I wouldn't say I was like at my peak. I wasn't at my highest necessarily, but I was pretty close to there. And the funny thing about it was when I was at like this good like medium high, I guess, it wasn't that everything had been resolved. There were certain problems I was still having that had been a problem back in June. It was just that everything felt a lot more manageable. That's the other thing. I feel like when you're going through a low, it's like everything feels significantly worse than it actually is. Like any small thing, it's like feels like the biggest thing ever. When you're closer to your high, when you're feeling better, those things that may be bothering you don't feel as big anymore because you have sort of this balance and you have things that are keeping you afloat. And so the truth is like, it's so bipolar. Like it's legitimately so bipolar. And like, I can just imagine like in the next year, I'll go through so many highs and lows. I'll go through so many goods and bads. I'll experience the extremes. I'll be in the middle. I'll be at my highest. I'll be at my lowest. And again, like nerve-wracking. It is really nerve-wracking, but it's also just so exciting. And that's how I feel about the early 20s and what my life has looked like so far and what I expect my life will look like for the next couple of years until I make it into like my mid 20s. Although I do really believe that this will continue throughout my 20s and honestly throughout my life, but I feel like really extremely in my 20s because I think like there's that TikTok sound where it's like when you're a young woman in your 20s, it's really like the trenches or something like that. And it's like I see that sound and I see what people are posting because people are usually posting like their empty fridge or like something like that. When I hear that sound, I'm like, okay, yeah, sometimes it is the trenches. Sometimes I'm like sitting here and I'm like, how am I gonna do this? I'm just like I'm a little baby. Like I don't know how to do this. But also I'm an adult and I have to figure it out myself and it's like scary and all that. But then at the same time, I'm just like, there's so much opportunity that it's exciting. It's like you have the whole world in front of you, and that's so exciting. It's like you can do so much with that. And all it takes is to kind of have some willpower and some drive to try and figure out a way to like really capture that opportunity and make the most out of it. And I feel like for me, I've really like over the past, I don't know, like probably more than that. Let's say like the past 9 months, 6 to 9 months, I've really been trying to figure out like, how can I manipulate this time and really make the most out of it? And that's why I have something like the podcast. It's like when I turned 20, this just reminded me of something that I'll talk about in a second. But when I turned 20, I like was laying in my bed on my 20th birthday and I had my notebook and I wrote down sort of a list of goals that I had for my 20s. And one of them was actually to start a podcast. And lo and behold, like, I don't know, 6 months later, I had my own podcast. Well, I had a podcast and now I have my own. But the idea of already having a podcast, it was like, oh my gosh, I've already fulfilled this one dream and I'm still 20. Like I'm still, first year. And that was just like really exciting. The other thing I wanted to mention is before I turned 20, I was really, really romanticizing the 20s. Like I was 19 years old and I was really romanticizing the 20s. And I created this poem. about the 20s, and it's very like, I don't have it on me right now. If not, I would read it. But it's very much like romanticizing the 20s. It's like the 20s is for fun. The 20s is for being beautiful and hot and having everything you want and blah blah, like really romanticizing it. And then I also created this Pinterest board, and I was putting on all these like pictures of what I thought my 20s was going to look like. And basically what I was doing here was I was just really romanticizing it. Like I was like, the 20s is going to be great. Like being a teenager was rough, okay? But the 20s, perfect. Like everything's going to go my way. It's going to be a dream and all that. And of course, when I turned 20 and I was hit by the hard reality that that's not how life works, okay? Life is never perfect. There's always ups, there's always downs. And as I was saying, like you experience extremes. And it was definitely like a sobering realization where I was like, oh, okay, cool. So, what do I do with this now? What do I do with this information? Like, I really thought that this was going to be perfect, and this just kind of feels the same. But at the same time, it was like, as I've gotten more and more into my 20s, I sort of see the vision that I was having when I was 19 years old. And I definitely feel like it's all really attainable. It's just not going to happen all at once. It's something that's going to take time. And I mean, if you really think about it, like the 20s, it's a decade. Okay, you have 10 years. If you think like 10 years back, I was 11, that's forever ago. I don't remember. I mean, like obviously I remember, I have memories from when I was 11, but it's like to think about everything that I did in that time, there was so much. I experienced so much. I mean, went through middle school, went through high school, I even started college. Like I moved away from home. I had so many different passions and interests, and I tried different things, and I had different friends and all that. And so it's like so much happened in that decade. So now I have to think about the decade ahead of me, and it's like so much is bound to happen in this decade as well, because if it happened when I was, you know, a teen, it's going to happen in my 20s for sure. But at the same time, it's like what I believed was going to happen. I think I was very close-minded in the idea that I thought, oh, it's just all going to happen at once. Like I'm going to turn 20 and like a genie is going to pop out and be like, okay, so I saw your Pinterest board, let's just grant you all your wishes, you know? And that was definitely not the case, and that's fine. Like I think another thing about the 20s that I really love is everything is a learning lesson. And I believe this like with everything in life, but I feel like there are so many different experiences you have in your 20s. Like if I think about just like the past year, you know, because I'm like freshly 21, there are so many lessons that I've learned, and I'm really grateful for all the lessons that I've learned, even if they've been tough lessons, even if I had to go through a low to kind of learn what I learned from it. I just think about how much knowledge I'm building up, and it's like I'm like creating this like dictionary of knowledge for myself, and with every experience I have, I can add to said dictionary. And like by the end of my 20s, I'll be like, I am 100 times more knowledgeable now than I was when I was 21 in my current state. And that's something that's also really exciting, because it's like you like, I don't know, I like the idea of like becoming more wise. I don't know, I think it's just exciting, like knowing that you're going to have these lessons in life, and even if they're tough, something is going to come out of it, and you're going to learn from it, and it'll help you to kind of drive yourself forward in the future. You have to make mistakes to learn. You have to make mistakes to kind of push yourself forward. And I think that's really what this like time period is about. It's kind of like you're a baby again, and you're trying to walk for the first time, and like you're taking baby steps, and you're maybe falling down and then trying to get back up again. Like the early 20s is really just about trying to really figure it out, and then trying to establish yourself as a person, trying to figure yourself out. I think another thing is this is really like a big time to learn about yourself. I think that a lot of people kind of come to these self-realizations at this age. As a teenager, all I did was try and fit in, try and be like other people. The moment I turned 20, I kind of gave up on that idea. I was like, yeah, obviously sometimes I wish I was like other people, but I also kind of came to this realization that I like how unique I am. I like that I have these special passions and interests that set me apart from other people. Maybe it's weird that I have these passions to other people, but to me, it's like perfect. This is exactly what I want. And I do really feel, as I said in my Who I Am episode, I do really feel like I've learned so much about myself in the past year, and I've become so much more secure in who I am as a person. I've become so much more stable. Honestly, that's where the stability is. The stability is in knowing who I am, or at least having a better idea as to who I am today, and having more security in who I am, and being okay with the fact that I'm not like other people, because I can't be, and I'm glad I'm not, because that's what sets me apart. That's what makes me special. That's what makes my life, and my experiences, my experiences. And part of it is like what allows me to come on here and have a podcast. And that's something, like I said, when I turned 20, one of my goals was to have a podcast. It's like who I am as a person allows me to do this. And that's so special. I think seriously, like if you are in your early 20s and you still don't feel very secure in who you are, I would definitely recommend spending some time trying to learn about yourself, setting yourself apart from other people, kind of giving up on the idea that you're going to try and fit in or you're going to find a way to fit in, and just take some time to like step back. I do feel like when you're in college, it is so hard to do that. I think maybe this realization comes a little later in life, maybe when, you graduate college and you're out in the real world by yourself and you're kind of just like, again, baby steps, trying to figure it out, like, and at the same time trying to figure out who you are kind of post college. I will say, like, when I was doing my first 2 years of college, it was so hard to set myself apart from other people because I was trying so hard to fit into that college culture. And because I had the experience that I did where I transferred and I was going to school, but I wasn't really having the college experience for like a year, that gave me the opportunity to just get more and more comfortable in my own skin and just learn about myself, learn what I like, learn what I don't like. If someone were to ask me, like, what are things that you like? I could give them a list. A year ago, I wouldn't have any answers. I mean, I would have answers, obviously, but they would have been superficial answers. They would have been based off of what I think people should like instead of what I know I like. For example, I know I like having a slow morning routine. This is something I just learned recently, like over the past month. But I like being able to have a couple of hours in the morning where I don't rush myself. I can take time to get ready, work out, have some time to read, like do things that make me feel productive, but also make me feel good, and then go into my day. This is like, again, a very recent realization, but at the same time, it's like this is part of just getting to know yourself, and this is part of growing up and becoming older, and that's what it really, I feel like the early 20s is about. And again, I could generalize this to the 20s in general, but of course I'm not gonna, if there are people out there who are like in their mid 20s or late 20s listening to this, I don't want to like offend you by saying, oh, this is the same thing now as it is for you guys, and then be wrong. Like I don't want to come back here in a couple of years and be like, yeah, so guys, I was actually so wrong when I made that very first episode that I dropped, so ignore that. But anyways, yeah, I mean, I just feel like there's just so much to this time, and it makes me excited. I honestly feel like I haven't been so excited about life really ever. I feel like I've really struggled sometimes with getting excited about what life has to offer. And I'm finally there. And I feel also really grateful. And I know that I live a life of privilege, and I know that not everyone is in my position. But it's not just about the privilege, it's about the struggle that you experience in this time that makes you who you are and makes you a better person and helps you move forward. And again, embrace the struggles, embrace the highs. I'm not gonna lie, am I gonna come on here and complain about the struggles sometimes? Absolutely. If I'm going through it, you're probably gonna hear about it. So I'm not sitting here saying like, be super happy about everything that comes in your life, and like, no matter how bad it is, like just smile through it. Like, I'm not saying that, okay? Like, I'm being realistic. When you're going through it, you're going through it. Like you don't want to hear someone be like, by the way, this is like the best time of your life, so enjoy it, even though you're really going through it right now. But I'm just saying, like, in general, I feel like this is a great time to be excited about life because there's just so much to offer and so much to learn and so much to experience. And that's kind of what I hope to cover in the various episodes that I put out. You'll hear about lows that I experience. For example, like the episode that is coming out next week is definitely about a low that I have been experiencing and that I think a lot of people experience at least once in their life, but if not more times. But then I'll also tell you stories about when things are going really great, and you'll sit there and you'll listen, you'll be like, oh my gosh, like her life is slaying right now. And that's what I'll feel in the time. But you have to just remember, like, when you hear those episodes, that is not the reality of life. Like, it's not always rainbows and butterflies. There are moments where you are like the troll under the bridge and you're getting beaten down. I don't know if that's a good analogy. I just really thought about Dora and like the troll under the bridge, which is so weird. Anyways, yeah, so that's honestly what I have to say about the early 20s. To my fellow early 20ers, be excited. Take every opportunity as a learning lesson, good or bad. Remember that nothing bad comes without good, and vice versa. Know that nothing lasts forever. Know that everything's temporary. Know that one day it'll make sense. Know that you're allowed to be confused. Know that you're not going to have all the answers to your questions right now. Know that one day you may. Know that there is so much opportunity out there. Know that you have the world in the palm of your hands and you can really do anything with it. You just have to figure out how to do it. You have to figure out what kind of effort, what kind of time, what kind of energy you need to put into it. I think be grateful. Being grateful is really great, but I'm not going to lie. I've never been the most grateful person. I feel like gratefulness is something that hasn't really come easily to me, I would say. But at the same time, like having taken some time to just reflect and to be grateful for what I have has made me realize that there is like so much more to my life than I thought there was. I think it helped me get closer to that high, you know, because I was like, well, if I really think about it, look at everything I have. And it's like so amazing that I have all of that, you know? And so it helped me feel a lot better about my life and a lot more excited and just a lot more grateful for what I have, obviously. So yeah, that's my message to you guys. And honestly, if you're anywhere in your 20s, I'm sure you can relate to this. If you're anywhere in your life, I'm sure you can relate to aspects of what I've talked about. If you're younger than me, like not in your 20s yet, this is something to consider. I know that like when I was a teenager, I was definitely not thinking this way. I didn't have the mental capacity to think this way, but just know that one day you'll find yourself in a position that I'm in and you'll realize that what I've said is like very true. And you'll have this realization for yourself. And I'm not telling you like, listen to what I say and just believe it. Because as I was talking to my mom today, she was like, you really are one of those people who has to try things for yourself to believe it. Like, she was like, I've told you all these stuff before, and then you go out and you do it yourself, and then you learn your lesson. And then you come back and you say the exact same thing I said. And I was like, yeah, I think I just don't trust that you know everything, I guess I need to have my own experience to say you were right or you were wrong, because who knows, like my experience may be different than yours. And even if it's the same, it's kind of my own story and it's a lesson that I learn. And I think it's just important to have experiences where you're learning lessons that are going to help you out as you progress in life. And I'm sure one day I will be like my mom, telling my kids all the lessons that I've learned, and they'll be like, yeah, not listening to you, gonna go do it myself. But hopefully in that moment, I'll remember that it's important that we have our own experiences that we learn by ourselves, because as much as people can tell us things, it's not until you've experienced it yourself that you really know that it's true. So anyways, yeah, this is really, I'm sure my grandmother is listening to this and I'm sure she can probably relate to certain things that I've said here. Please confirm if you can. But anyways, yeah, so that's basically it for me. If you like this episode, don't forget to follow me on whatever streaming platform you're listening to this episode on. If you didn't already listen to the other episodes that dropped today, definitely go do that, because those are important so that you get to know everything about me and this podcast and what's going to happen on it. And yeah, I will see you next week. Like I said, next week's episode is a little bit about the trenches, but I'm sure a lot of you guys can relate to it in some way or another, or you've at least been there at some point in your life. So yeah. Anyways, I will see you guys next week. Bye.